Well, good morning, everybody. This is Richard Chaplin of the Managing Partners Forum, and I'm delighted to welcome you to episode 13 of Sharing Management, Business and Personal Challenges from the Pandemic. I don't think I really thought we'd be doing episode 13 when I started this all those months ago. And guess what? We've extended it to October because A, it's been really popular, but more importantly, unfortunately, the world that we expected to get back to quickly doesn't look like that's happening very rapidly. So what I'm going to do is just kind of remind us, and if you've seen this before, forgive, because I know some people come on every call. What are some of the issues that we've been talking about over these 2 or 3 months? And some of the things that I'm sure will come up today, if not from the presentations during the panel session. So we talked a lot about leadership, the leadership team, the role and the styles, and the fact that actually having a single style isn't necessarily a very good way forward. The point about people being safe, now it could be an office or a home environment, and most people I think are going to be in their home environment for quite a long time. A piece about preserving the reputation while making the tough decisions, and there's lots of those are being made. The media much more, what should I say, interested in what's going on than possibly they were a few months ago. Winning the work from new clients, sustain the workforce. You'll lose clients, it's inevitable. So how are you going to make sure you win the new ones when face-to-face encounters are much, much harder? A piece around productivity, morale, mental health and well-being. I'm sure we'll touch that today. We always do, because at the end of the day, fundamentally, we're people businesses. The piece around planning, the planning assumptions, and some of the alternative scenarios for this new normal. It is beginning to emerge, and we'll talk today about some of the tech dimensions to that particular area. Professional relationships, strategies for communicating through novel channels. Managing partner blogs take you so far. It's got to be a little bit more engaged than that, I think you'll find. The piece around serving your clients, and we are talking today actually about Brexit and international clients, therefore very important in that context, and we'll be doing the poll shortly on that one. Around the financial side, the usual billing and collecting debtors, but actually time recording, which actually on the whole is pretty good. People are now actually, some people say better than that than they were, but the whole issue of client solvency, that's what's keeping the the finance director awake at night. But we're all doing the work, can they pay? We looked at suppliers and all the key contract clauses. Are they just sitting in some filing cabinet somewhere, or can you actually do something about them? How can you make sure that the key force majeure clauses are exercised at the right time, etc. And again, I'm sure we'll touch on this on the tech side, the cybersecurity and the phishing once you're kind of outside that warm embrace of the corporate firewall. Two things that I always come back to, and they really are important, I think. First of all, you must ration your own time to create space for the real emergencies. It's really easy to be busy. Is everything you're doing absolutely essential? And that also get everyone to recognize that everyone needs downtime, and that includes you as the leader. Working 15-hour days isn't very smart, because at the end of the day, it's a bit like not having enough sleep. You make suboptimal decisions, and that doesn't help anyone. 7 strategies when facing a pandemic. Again, I always give the same ones. I think they're lovely. Think big. As Lewis Carroll says, you've got to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast. Remember that you are the power of your connections, and that reciprocity is fundamental to that equation. Think small. Think about the angles that resonate with your key audiences. Blunderbuss doesn't really work. Shotgun, etc. Be targeted. Do a series, not a one-off. This is obviously a good example. What you're doing, you're converting an audience into a community. Drop the convention. Do go for the new ideas and services, and I know we'll be talking about that today in terms of the tech dimension. Speed is of the essence, and a lot of people had to move really, really quickly. A 2-year project happens in 2 days. Whoops. But that's happened in the infrastructure. Has it happened in the way that people work? That's less likely, I think. So articulate and market out your assumptions, and if they prove invalid, amend them and pivot in a new direction. Be entrepreneurial, keep listening and innovating, and as I always say every week, the key word in that last sentence is listening. If you're not listening, you're not innovating, because you're not aware of what your clients really want. And that's thanks again to Elena Kudsko of Globsec in Bratislava. So there you go. So who's on today's panel? Welcome back, Francesca, as always. Thank you, Francesca. She always brings a ray of sunshine into our life on a Friday morning, so thank you for that. I'll bring in Ray. Ray is Melbourne-based. Lovely to have somebody from that part of the world who's obviously much closer to the weekend than we are, which is nice for him. And he is the founder and co-founder and CEO of Performance Leader, and as you may have saw from my producer notes, produced a really interesting report on equity partner reward and performance, which we will be talking about in more depth shortly. followed by Rick Seabrook, who is the co-founder and CEO of Panorama Digital. And Rick is one of these people who really believes that it's possible for the world to change and professional firms to adopt new ways of working based on technology. And I'm really looking forward to his thoughts as some of the opportunities and threats associated with that brave new world. Jeremy, welcome back. Jeremy, as you all know, is the managing partner of Hayes McIntyre and has been with us on an every other week basis, I think, basically. And it's really lovely to hear your little bit of video diary, but also how you think of what you feel about some of the issues being presented by Ray and Rick in today's around HR, around partners, around technology, because if they're not fairly high on your agenda, then I'd be somewhat surprised. And obviously Lucy comes in from Bays to give us her thoughts on some of the policy issues that government's doing. Yours truly hosting it in my usual way. So that's today's panel. I'd like to quickly run through last week's poll because I think that was really interesting. For those that were on last week's session, we did a couple of polls and this was one of them. And what comes out from this is there are really two dimensions. There's the one which is around eradicating the pandemic and there's a one around the depth of the downturn. And kind of what I see from this is that the pink ones are the ones that people are least prepared for in terms of the tall columns on the left, and the blue is the one they're more prepared for. And if you look at the one on the far left, the inclusive abundance, that's positive in both directions. We get rid of the pandemic and it's great, but nobody's really preparing for that. And then on the other side, the next one, the long goodbye, we don't contain the pandemic and we have a long downturn, and nobody's really preparing for that either. The two most popular ones, and they're almost spread evenly, which is fascinating, I thought, are the one where the pandemic is dealt with, but the downturn happens, and the other one, which is the pandemic isn't, but the economy is vibrant. Now, which of those scenarios emerges? And one of the things the panel came up with last week quite strongly was, well, actually, we're kind of preparing for all of them, but actually, when we asked the audience, so to speak, this was what emerged, which again, Rohit was helping us, so that was really interesting feedback for him too. So what else came out from last week? Well, we took 10 of the best questions, we turned it into a monthly tracker. And I won't go through this, I'll go through this really quickly. Obviously, it's all available on the in the management library and that sort of area. But there is the move about a month ago that everybody was going to be altering their business model. That's fallen back. And I think the strategy and purpose ones have sort of resumed. Otherwise, not too many changes. But I think people have kind of thought, maybe altering the business model isn't that easy. Let's just have a clear purpose and strategy instead, which is actually where they were at going back into February. So actually, the pandemic hasn't fundamentally changed priorities. And that, I think, is quite interesting as an observation in itself. What else? What level of dip? Again, as I said in a newspaper article recently, it's kind of not as bad as it was. The green one, which was the really extreme, is falling back. Blue obviously was the one that we did last week in terms of dip. Level of activity, again, not quite as bad as it was in terms of expectations. New workflow, same comment applies. But remember, there's massive, massive contraction going on here. So these are still pretty big numbers under any scenario. The same with the headcount. And I'm going through these quite quickly because they are all available to you. We looked also around the extent to which people are likely to be working from home. No real change over the last month. And it's pretty obvious that most of us are going to be working from home for the foreseeable. I think that's fairly easy to see. The general mood is pretty apprehensive, to be honest. So are we forcing people back before they're ready? Good question. What about office space requirements? Well, it's kind of yo-yoed a bit. I think at the moment, people are now going back to slightly more around the less place, having in the middle thought, oh, we need it for social distancing, but then actually, do we need it at all? So I kind of see a bit of a yo-yo over the 3 times we've asked that question. And in terms of staff being furloughed, there's clearly going to be less staff being furloughed in the extension after the end of July, 41% up to 49%, and the rest trickling back as well. So people have been using the scheme, but probably won't be using it quite to the same extent. And what do we get? Well, we got some lovely coverage in the Daily Telegraph based on that tracker, which was awesome. So do check that out if you're interested. I can't obviously show you the whole thing because of the usual reasons. And as usual, we had some lovely feedback from government saying what that's really, really valuable. So when we come to the poll, which is literally now, please complete it. It is anonymous. And the reason we're doing it this week is something different. As some of you may be aware, there is a call for evidence from UK Parliament and they're interested in individuals and organisations to submit evidence. We've agreed to partner with a couple of very important business schools, the UKT Trade Policy Observatory and the City Ready in Birmingham, with a joint submission, because we think public-private sector submissions work really well. But do please look at this. It's up till the 28th of June, so we're still very much in time, and they really would welcome submissions from individuals to anybody on this call. We'll put in a joint one based on the poll you're about to do, but please don't feel you can't put in your own submission, because at the end of the day, for most of us, the UK-EU relationship on professional business services is going to be pretty fundamental, and it could be called into question quite soon. Okay, today's poll, as I said in my producer notes, covers future UK-EU trading arrangements. And this is obviously after the transition period comes to an end, which for, I think, most working purposes, we're assuming is the end of the calendar year, but things have changed. So I'm going to end the poll now, and thank you very much for those that have completed it. We've had a good number of people who did so, and I'm going to share the results. So let's just talk through those. So what we're seeing here is the first question was around essentially the extent to which your firm currently exports professional services outside the UK. And as you can see, the one that is markets outside the EU, EUS is the one that is actually highest on that list, but all of them are getting 85% of the people who responded, more importantly, are exporting somewhere, which is about what our stats normally show. So that's quite helpful to know. In terms of the conditions which are vital, the electronic delivery is by far and away the most popular, but the others also are into sort of quite high numbers, 40, 50%, that sort of thing. If your firm is do these require international transfers of personal data? Yes, mostly is the case. That's the most common one. So again, if the data provisions aren't there, that could create an issue. And what type of international, the EU Services Directory definitely is the one that gets the most favour, but all the others are seen to be important in different ways, I suspect. How ready are you? Mostly, I think, is the honest answer, and that may concern some people. Obviously, the politicians would like everybody to be completely. I think the fact that 11% are not at all, it probably will be of concern. Is it, when we think about recognition of professional qualifications, that's in the essential and prerequisite, that's 50% of them, and that's quite high. Nice to have a mere 20. In terms of what will happen in the event of moving to WTO, and again, remember that 15% of people who answered have no export, so we have to adjust that because there will clearly be no reduction. So yeah, there are some quite high numbers, and 13% is more than 40%. That's obviously in year one. And then if I'm looking at year three, again, you're still getting quite high numbers. 10 was more around analysis. So I won't really bother with that one. So there we go. I'll stop sharing, close that down, and I will hand over to Francesca. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. 13 weeks, good Lord. Feels like we just started yesterday, doesn't it? I'm going to pick up on the two themes for today, and it fits very beautifully with some of the discussions that we've had ongoing in our organisation around how do we renew, rebuild for whatever this new normal is going to be. And I think we're all really alive to the fact that nobody knows quite where things are going to go, but there's some really nice trends and some good thinking that can happen now. Let me pick up first on that tech-based innovation piece. And I think there's, it's going to be great to hear the panelists on this, but there's a huge amount that people are going, well, actually, we need to work out what it is we need to do before we can really think about whether tech-based innovation can help us or hinder us, or whether there's a new service that might come out of this for us in the professional services sphere. A lot of people are looking at how tech can really help enable things that need to happen, but maybe help enable things that currently can't happen. Will it revolutionize some elements? In many elements of professional services, we've talked about tech being an enabler for what feels like a very, very long time, and the big leaps forward still feel they need to come. Will this be a driver to change some of the ways we do compliance, some of the ways that we do reporting, some of the ways that we do elements of what we have? I think one of the really interesting elements is tech's such a wide sphere. Basic robotics feels like it's already got a good foothold, but those advances in AI that we were talking about last week are really fascinating to see. How does that really get taken up by professional services? I'm going to also just touch on the whole challenge around rewarding people during a pandemic. I work with 131 different member firms. And so I've seen 131 completely different methodologies for rewarding people, and each country has its own rules, its own regulations, but often its own way of doing it. And when you have multitude of partners, the whole reward of equity partners becomes a bit like the dark arts. It's often done in the darkened room, and things emerge, and often a source of huge contention, and usually something that there's a lot of chatter in any firm around. But I've seen various firms take views about how they want to reward in a time where you're actually trying to encourage everybody within your firm. You're trying to make sure that people have roles and things that enable them to keep productive now and be successful in the future, and make sure we don't lose a generation by doing radical job cuts that then, when the world begins to come back, you haven't got the right people at the right level and the right skills. So I've seen a lot of partners take various types of pay reduction, however that may fall, be that in the dividends they receive, deferment of what they get, their profit share, and in the many different ways that it's formulated. One of the things I think that's really come through very strongly is the value of equity partners is that you usually have some form of share or dividend or profit amount, however it's formulated, but you also usually have some discretionary element. And in terms of right here, right now, that discretionary element is unlikely to be about revenue winning. Very, very many partners often fall into it's all about the revenue I bring in, it's all about the rainmaking. And I think most partnerships now have moved to an element of that, but a much bigger element about the behaviors that people show and exhibit and the role modeling that they do. And in the time of pandemic, who stepped up? Who's been willing to be agile? Who's actually gone the extra mile to support both their team, but the teams around them? Who's been the ones who've actually helped the firm enable it to cope in what's been the most difficult scenario many of them have ever faced? Who's really been engaging with clients in a way that may not be an immediate revenue uplift, but has been about building relationships that will see it well for the future? And who has been the kinds of individuals who are truly living the value of the firm? And I think in terms of that equity reward, it's that discretionary element that most equity systems have that's going to be the most important to drive good behaviors and to take something out of the last few months that actually reflects the positive elements of partners who've really stepped up. So Richard, that probably is enough for me today, but happy to pick up questions later on.
And thank you. And mentioning questions, by all means, do put, if there are issues you want to raise, do put them in the Q&A as you go along, because we can then, that gives us more time to think about the answer apart from anything else. Ray, what a great intro to your thoughts about the survey you've done and the extent to which you should systematize something which, if we hear from Francesca, maybe should be made actually more fluid in terms of individual partner behavior and performance, which is inherently harder to measure. But you may disagree with me. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Richard, and also thank you, Francesca, because you've set the context really well. We set out to do this 2020 Equity Partner Contribution Compensation Survey in December, and we didn't really know what was about to unfold. By the time the survey finished, we still didn't quite know what was about to unfold, but certainly by the time Michael Roche and I, my co-author, started to put the results together, things had well and truly unfolded and or unraveled in some cases. And so the lenses that we applied to the results were twofold. Firstly, as we would have ordinarily, to look at this in the context of the evolving professions and the sorts of changes that we've been seeing over the last 10 or 15 years around competition, around labour supplies, around technology and procurement, etc. So all of those things that we are pretty well familiar with now. Overlaid with that, of course, is what's right in front of us. And what emerged for us were two things. Firstly, the importance of cohesion amongst partnerships at this point. We know that there are some very difficult decisions being made in relation to compensation and headcount and all of these sorts of things. I think what we learnt from the global financial crisis was the importance of maintaining cohesion. And without going into depth on this, I certainly think that firms have benefited from that being in the recent memory. Secondly, though, picking up on what Francesca said, a lot of what we're asking partners to do right now is really be very entrepreneurial, not necessarily in the business development sense, but in the team building sense and the client outreach sense, to be looking for how they can be of use and value to their clients in this time. And that is an entrepreneurial skill set that will be important. So they're the two lenses that we looked at the results through. Before I go into the 5 key findings, let me just step back and tell you a little bit about the survey. We had 160 respondents, which for a survey of this nature is pretty good. And I want to thank our collaboration partners for helping us with the distribution, including Richard, you and Managing Partners Forum, as well as NatWest and Edge International and Chile IQ Marketing. In terms of those 160 people, respondents, 50% were comprised of managing partners and CEOs, and the next most prominent groups were CFOs, COOs, and HRDs. We had strong representation from the UK, continental Europe, and Australia. Predominant responses from law firms, followed by accounting firms. And in terms of the size of firms, almost 90% of firms had 75 or fewer partners. That is within the local partnership. So still some members of larger federations within that group as well. In terms of the 5 key insights, and I will move through these very quickly, but at the end I will tell you where you can go to find out more information about this. Firstly, the first striking insight is that when it comes to measures of performance, 3/4 of the measures that we're using to identify reward outcomes relate to production. Just let that sink in for a moment. 75%. Now that's bigger than we'd expected. We knew it would be large, but that's a very significant number. Second most popular were business development measures, then some leadership measures. Really nowhere on the radar was collaboration or innovation. And just let that sink in for a moment, because so much of our effort as organisations is focused around getting people to behave in a more collaborative and innovative way, and yet the reward measures that we're using are simply not following. I'll stop there and move on to the next one. The second insight is that firms on the whole are good at recognising good performance, but are struggling with dealing with poor performance. So 88% of respondents said that they were happy with the way that the firm acknowledges good performance. Only 59% were confident that firms were dealing with poor performance through clear improvement plans. Again, there's a whole dialogue around why we struggle with poor performance, and now's not the time or place. But the important thing I want to note there is that this figure in 2020 hasn't shifted from our 2017 research. This third insight that I want to share is that the top to bottom spread, that is to say the multiple pay between the lowest paid equity partner and the highest paid equity partner in the firm, the most popular spread is now between 3 to 1 and 5 to 1. And that's significant because in 2017, when we ran this survey, the most popular spread was between 2 to 1 and 3 to 1. So there's clearly an effort to reward high performers. What we would say briefly in relation to our current context is we've got to be very careful that when we stretch that spread, we don't hurt cohesion. And so it's not good enough just to stretch it. There actually has to be other reforms going on in the firm to justify that kind of change whilst maintaining cohesion. The fourth insight is that partner compensation systems are effective at providing fair outcomes, with 74% of respondents saying that was the case, but only 52% said that the process was efficient. And those of you who are involved in it will feel that pain. You'll know why that number is pretty low. And again, it's consistently low across multiple years. And there are things that can be done. A lot of that does involve the use of technology, but I won't go into depth there. And the fifth and final insight from the survey that I want to share today is that partner compensation systems tend to undervalue leadership and management roles. And for many of you on the call in leadership and management roles, you won't be surprised. But the telling factor here is that only 31% of respondent firms are explicitly acknowledging and dealing with leadership and management roles in their contribution and reward processes. Again, there's a lot that can be done there, but now's not really the time to go into that. My colleague, my co-author, Michael Roche, is presenting Richard at a session next week, and it will probably have a chance to go into a little bit more depth. But if you are interested in finding out a bit more, there's on the Performance Leader website, that's our website, performanceleader.com, there is a 1-hour webinar that you can view on this, a half-hour podcast you can listen to, and you can download the report as well. So I should stop there and hand back.
Thanks, Ray. That's great. Tech came in every time we mention it, doesn't it, Rick? So Rick, who has a distinguished career in excuse me, major consultancy firms, and then various sort of what I call new innovative tech leaders, and now setting up his own business, which is exciting times for that too, I imagine. So come talk to us a little bit about tech-based innovation. Is it a mirage, or is this something that firms should really be looking at seriously?
Thanks, Richard. Yes, a recent start of Panorama Digital, yet to decide whether it was the greatest moment of timing or the worst, but I guess time will tell. So let's just some thoughts on this very topical question around opportunities and threats for tech-based innovation. I think whereas a couple of months ago firms were sort of purely focused on what we would probably call incident response, we're now starting to see some planning and activity and thinking starting to take place across 3 distinct horizons. Firstly, there are sort of the interventions firms are continuing to make to maintain their digital resilience for the next sort of 3 to 6 months. It's interesting seeing the findings of what people are planning for on the survey you showed earlier. And these are very practical, focused activities, such as continuing secure remote access to firms' data and applications, procuring any remaining hardware, the completion of any critical cloud migrations, and the implementation of new tech-enabled procedures and controls around things like client onboarding, collaboration, and document signing. We've all heard a lot about. So there's clearly a focus and activity still happening around that digital resilience agenda. But as their clients increasingly adopt permanent remote working, so professional services firms are also now starting to think about how they could move to a digital first way of working, and in particular looking at how existing technologies can be extended to deliver superior client experiences, operational efficiencies, and greater workforce engagement. So here we're seeing opportunities to add automation to key client processes, such as, for example, identity verification, remote data collection, document and contract flows, those sorts of things. An area that fascinates me is around the potential for tech to transform internal processes, such as knowledge management, learning and innovation, and Ray mentioned there performance management. On the one hand, we've lost some of the tacit sharing opportunities of tacit knowledge sharing opportunities of being co-located with fellow workers. But on the other, we've gained the ability to quickly connect with firm-wide experts and form non-hierarchical networks and communities to share ideas and opinions. So in the medium term, some of these new forms of tech-based collaboration could be harnessed through, for example, crowdsourcing type technologies to challenge existing ways of working, assist with learning and development, and bring forward new inventions. So just some sort of thoughts around that. And then finally, there are a small number of firms, I would say, starting to ask what all of this might mean for their longer term ambitions and the potential to embrace radically new business models. And here, the question I'm hearing is, will COVID and the lockdown accelerate or slow down the rate of tech-based innovation? Because in the long run, there will be a number of very real opportunities to reimagine professional services by placing tech at the point of need, so alongside the client and sometimes inside of the client's firewall, so to speak, rather than at the point of delivery. To invent new products and services based on all the terabytes and terabytes of electronic data that's being generated right now. And to co-create solutions with clients and other industry participants, such as the regulatory sandbox providers who are open to shared experimentation now more so than they may have been in the past. So there will be very real opportunities, but as I said, I think that right now that's sort of Horizon 3, and there are very few firms really thinking that way. And that is often because there are also significant threats, and to name just a few, I mean, clearly affordability. If we face the long goodbye scenario, then all bets are off. And even if the macro picture is not that gloomy, there is a genuine concern around winning new clients in the foreseeable future for firms, as again has been evidenced by the survey results here. Digital security, the levels of phishing attempts and breaches are at record highs. Digital fatigue, the Zoomification of our lives, and the ongoing cultural resistance, as I heard it described this week, as the firm's experts emerge from their caves, ever more desperate to put themselves in the center of the client relationship. So there's still going to be sort of those cultural threats to any tech-based innovation. The risk of early self-congratulations. We've completed our cloud migration. We're all on Office 365, so now we're a digital business. That sort of mindset. Well, you're not. Or firms simply replicating current inefficient practices in new technologies, which is another common pitfall to watch out for. And then finally, this question about tech platforms and the viability of many of the new AI technologies on which new business models might be developed. And I think if I had one sort of specific recommendation to share with this group, it would be to look very carefully at the capabilities of your existing enterprise software for some of your advanced automation or digitization needs before embarking on purchasing new tech that may not be around in 12 months' time, let alone be sort of fully secure or scalable, into your client's environment. So just to wrap up my thoughts, clearly there'll be a lot of opportunities for tech-based innovation, as there always are after any major change event. But these must be done on solid foundations, and the priority right now is to get those foundations secured ASAP in the next few months. That's the digital resilience piece. But then there will be opportunities within the firm internally and potentially in the marketplace. But there will be barriers, and they can be managed so long as they are identified. But make sure that any transformation you embark on is built on solid technology choices. Ideally ones that meet that triumvirate of affordability, scalability, and security. And I'm certain it'll be an interesting few months ahead. So I'll hand back to you now, Richard, and thank you very much.
Jeremy coming in a second. Just a quick thought, which is somebody said to me once, they said the decision that the managing partner hates most in the year is signing off the tech budget, because it's a very large number and they probably don't know very much of what the money is really being spent on. That's probably unfair, Jeremy, but please join us and give your thoughts today.
Absolutely agree with that, Richard. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's keeping well. Just a few thoughts over things that have happened over the last 2 weeks, and I'll also weave in perhaps some comments picking up on Rick and Ray's presentations. I guess we still, just to remind people, we are a central London firm with one office there. There's still lots of discussion around the return to working from office. There seems to be very mixed views in the marketplace at the moment. Although there has perhaps been some acceleration with regard to firms moving back over the last week. But we continue to work from home and have said we will give our staff at least 1 month's notice in that regard. I think central London is different because of the commute compared to other parts of the country. although, as I say, we're aware that there are certain other organisations, professional services firms in central London that are starting to open up on a very limited basis. We also have the complexity of attending client sites, which is still prohibited, but we're looking at how we will allow this and manage this over the coming months. Other challenges we have at the moment, although chargeability of our staff is pretty good, and productivity, the efficiency is perhaps not so good, and this perhaps ties into some of Rick's comments. We need to find ways in which we can improve the efficiency of our new ways of working. Our challenges include really teams, particularly audit teams, where we have staff at different levels, and they're missing out on that on-the-job training by not being physically present in the same location. So that's a challenge. Clients are a little bit more relaxed around timetables, and we're finding that our people are having to be far more flexible in terms of dealing with different jobs during the course of the day or the week, etc. So there's some challenges around that for us in terms of how we make that more efficient. But we're pretty determined to tackle that and persevere at the moment, and to make sure that even if there is a return to office, and that will be phased return and limited people for the foreseeable future, even if that happens, we do not want to resort to our old ways of working. We've got to find ways of making the new ways of working become more efficient, and by that I suppose I mean we shouldn't just return to how we previously did audits, returning to client sites, returning to physical meetings, etc. So there is a piece there that we're fairly determined to work on. As I previously said, we are monitoring very closely our billings and our future work to the extent that we understand at the moment what has been billed in advance, what we've got deferred compared to our budget, and what work we might have for later months in the year. And we're pretty close eye on that, and particularly important around our audit work, and we're keeping close tabs on what audits are being deferred and when they're likely to happen, etc., etc. It's starting to be increasingly, I think, business as usual in many areas, whether that's implementing new systems, routine regulator reviews, etc. But there's a lot more starting to happen. We're into manager appraisal season. So that's starting to happen at the moment as well. We are now starting to provide weekly staff briefings to include other topics and areas of interest from other departments and sectors within the business. I suppose just picking up on partner award, Ray would probably consider us to be unusual in that regard. We have a fairly flat profit share structure, and there isn't really any discretionary element to that, although of course it's all subjective, and there is an element of discretion, I suppose, when we come to move partners' profit shares around. But inevitably, when you have difficult times, there is increased focus on performance, and that is certainly the case for us. We do talk about policing the boundaries, so we accept that the partners are generally contributing in their own way, whether that's from technical expertise, we do have a committee that polices the boundaries at the lower performing end, I suppose is the best way to present that. I think those were the key sort of messages from me, Richard, for what's happened at Hayes McIntyre in the last couple of weeks.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks, Jeremy, and we look forward to your video diary in 2 weeks' time. That's going to be great. It's lovely to have somebody who really is very much in control of that agenda and gives that air of confidence as well. Talking of which, Francesca, would you like to kind of give your reflections on what you've heard today? We've got a question around reward and people stepping up to the plate, but that may be best handled by Ray. But Francesca, give us your thoughts first.
Yeah, actually, that was really interesting. Intriguing to see how that survey is reflecting the different viewpoints and how some things have not really changed all that much. But actually, no, I am going to have a little bash at Mike's question. So thank you for that, Mike, as always. Around how do you differentiate between the person who perhaps is doing that more reflective, deeper dive and the person who is perhaps just good in the moment? Which I think is perhaps the nub of the question. I hope I've got that right. And that's that every year's challenges, the whole value of having some discretion in your equity scheme is to reward the people who've done great things one year and maybe do just a regular good job year on year. So I think you take a choice about what behaviours you're most looking to reward. I mean, my sense is you've got some people who have got deep specialist information, advice, technical knowledge that's been hugely valuable, and you'd want to recognise that. And you've also got some people who've done what you need to do in a crisis, which actually sometimes be a bit more T-shaped. You know, you cover a broader area, but you've got some deep specialisms in there. So I think there's going to be some very interesting talks around various tables as we move into reward season. I know quite a lot of firms do it later on in the year than now, but I think one of the vital things to keep in mind is what are you actually trying to do from your reward system? What are you trying to encourage? What are you trying to reward? And actually, how are you making a statement to everybody in your firm, not just your partners, about what you value and what you don't? And that always feels to me one of the really core parts of any equity scheme is what are you telling the rest of your firm about what you really believe in?
I'll pass this over to Ray in a sec. I mean, the only thought I have is that there's always this issue of the individual versus the team. And often the best teams, you've got people who complement each other. Whereas when you're coming to individual reward, that's harder. But actually, often the person who steps up to the plate, combined with somebody who has got that deeper expertise, leads to the better outcome. Ray, over to you. Collaboration, in other words.
Yes, exactly, Richard. I was going to say that I think underlying our view is that one size doesn't fit all, and that a mature partnership will allow partners to play to strengths. So to Mike's question, I think both of those things are important right now. And in in a partnership, you would hope that you'd have groups of people who are doing both of those things. The challenge there, of course, is that it's harder to manage that system. It's easier to say one size fits all. Here's the prescriptive approach to what a partner should do or be. In asking people to play to strengths, we're really saying there's a fair bit of effort that has to go into defining what contribution looks like, and then we need management effort. And invariably in a larger partnership, that means empowering the practice group heads or department heads to get more heavily involved in taking some of the pressure off the managing partners. So the philosophy, I think, is a really important one, but it needs process and system to enable it.
Richard, could I just add?
Yeah, please do. And then I've got a question for Lucy, which from anonymous attendee, which you may understand why when you hear it, but please come in first.
Very quickly, I think it's really important not to forget the reward structure for staff at this time as well, particularly if you're in an organisation where partner profits are going to be publicly disclosed at some point. But looking at the staff reward structure at the moment is really important for us, and we're having lots of discussion around that and making sure that that's transparent for them.
Thanks, Jeremy. Lucy, welcome. I know you weren't with us last week because we were looking at something a bit different, but pleased you can be joining us with today. And there's a question which I think is very much in your space. I don't know if you had a chance to see it or not, but the extent to which, and perhaps then if you could just, if you give people the question rather than me, that's probably safer.
Yeah, so it's around current requirement from the government to work from home if possible, even if it's not an ideal solution for the individual firm. I think a lot of people are keen to get back to work and kind of get back to the new normal, and we're very aware of that. We're currently looking into kind of how we can support, best support return to work. Again, I think this came up in another question, it's very difficult, particularly in central London, where our sector is kind of heavily based. The government at the moment, we're looking at things, how the track and trace system can be implemented in the workplace, how we can relax the 2-meter rule, which is currently a requirement. I think we're one of 3 countries that are enforcing that. So it is kind of top of our agenda, but that feedback and that question is great, and I will take that away as well.
Is there anything else you want to share with us today, Lucy, in terms of a couple of weeks since you've been on this call, obviously, in terms of development?
Not really. I mean, we're kind of focusing on what I kind of raised a few weeks ago, how we can support businesses getting back to work, how we can support the new normal. Obviously, we're kind of looking at future focused, how we engage with the sector after this kind of quite fast-paced, intense engagement period we've had. And again, how we support the sector as we leave the EU. But again, we're kind of in a listening capacity at the moment. So any feedback, and I mean, this forum is the polls have been enormously helpful. But even comments such as that question, please kind of send them my way, and I'll take them back. It's really useful.
Yeah, for those who aren't aware, we've agreed with the government that if we're happy to sort of collate and curate questions and pass them through to Lucy, and then she will, in her own way, reach across the hydra of government and come back with an answer. Okay, let's go back to Rick and just kind of pick up some of the more sort of tech issues. Is there anything that you've heard today, particularly in connection with what Jeremy was saying, that reflects a different view from your reality, or are you totally in agreement with that?
No, I'm completely in agreement. I think the other aspect I think is interesting, and you touched on it, is just around cost transformation. So, you know, one of the things that the last few years, you know, there's been a lot of investment put into technologies in firms, many of which have been sort of I would say on the fringes of the actual day-to-day work. And one of the things that I'm hearing and seeing, and I think is an opportunity for many firms, although, you know, it's perhaps not a particularly attractive one, is actually the rationalization of a lot of that expenditure, and just to sort of focus down on, you know, the sort of core priorities of the business over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. I think smart firms are doing that. I mean, you mentioned, you know, the hardest part is signing off the IT budget. Well, I would say, you know, there's an opportunity right now to go through your IT budget and slash, you know, a bunch of things that whilst were interesting, you know, and no doubt in the long term we'll get back to, that, you know, that actually that can help you afford other things that you need that are more critical right now in your business. So I think the area of sort of cost transformation, I think in technology is also a sort of big theme that I'm seeing, hearing.
But I'm sure that nobody's going to want to slash their partner reward system and all the bits that go with that. So who knows? We'll see. Francesca, do you have any sort of final thoughts before we close up this week? In terms of,
I was just picking up one of the questions that someone sent in around bad performance, and really probably I think the key is you don't wait to a performance review to do that. How do it in real time? You really explain what the issue is. You spell out what the expectation is, what the impact has been, what you want to see that's different, and if it's appropriate, what support is available to help that behaviour change or that issue change. And I think, as with all such things, doing it 6 months later or 3 months later loses its effectiveness and often is too late to create the change. So real-time constructive feedback, I think, comes through very strongly in some of the things that many people have talked about today.
And one of the wider questions, I guess, is the extent to which you have an annual performance review, and should you be doing sort of as you go along, just in time reviews, but then arguably people might get a bit lost and not be able to actually work out overall how they're doing. And I know the pendulum's been swinging quite actively from firms. We're going to scrap the performance appraisal altogether, and others are now saying no, well actually that doesn't really help. So I think that particular, Ray, you've probably got views on that as well, but I think that particular issue is still very much fluid at the moment. Is that fair?
Yes, it is fluid, and it really does come down to what works for the individual firm and industry, and even we see within practice groups. Jeremy mentioned the audit group. Has a very different cadence to a lot of other groups within the same firm, and so it can be quite tricky to find something that works at a natural level for these different groups.
Wonderful. Well, I think we've kind of now got to that magic point, sadly, when our hour is nearly over. So all the videos for all the previous 12 episodes and shortly this one, and all the Hear From Experts, and as Ray mentioned, we have a chance to explore that survey that they've just conducted in a bit more depth on Wednesday, which is great. So you can find them all in the Management Library. You can also find the polls and all the poll results, and as Lucy said, thank you from government, how much they appreciate that feedback. And as I said, it was went into the Daily Telegraph a few days ago, which again shows that professional services doesn't always reach that wider audience. So that's great in itself, I think. As always, I like to thank not just the presenters, but also the people who are with us, and most of you seem to be with us most of the hour, and some of the feedback we're having, which is I'm very humbled by, quite frankly, but again, it's what keeps you going each week, and that's the main thing, I guess. Now that we can't even clap for the NHS workers, presumably it's the only thing that marks the passing of one person's week at the bottom. So thank you for that. As I mentioned, again, Michael Roche, who's the partner with Ray on the project, is going to be talking about equity partner review and award systems and for us next Wednesday, which I think will be really interesting because there's a lot of meat in that survey. I know that because I've looked at it. And today, I hope you find it valuable. And I always say this, please recommend others to stay up. We're currently running around about the 800 mark in terms of people who've registered for the series. And that's in, I think, 18 countries now. We had Nigeria and Dominican Republic last week. And don't ask me how they heard about it, but we live in a world of social media, so anything's possible. And do consider supporting our work by joining the forum, because at the end of the day, I have a milk bill to pay as well, as they say in the vernacular. So thank you all very much, panel. Been a great group of people. I think we've explored some wonderful, really important issues, which most managing partners have always grappled with, but even more important in the current climate. And then how you then graft your one-off annual review of partner performance in the current climate is something I think a few people are looking around the corner and thinking, don't really like the look of that. So thank you for all your insights. And if only saying, well, actually, no one's really got the answer, but the best thing, as Rose says, is to be flexible and fluid and work out what works best for you and your partners. And that then gives the right message cascading down the firm, because at the end of the day, firms are collaborative entities. Otherwise, you might as well be sole traders. On which happy note, I shall leave you for this week. We'll obviously be back next week with some, again, exciting guests, Francesca, and we will hopefully spend another happy hour with you on Friday morning. Thank you again, and goodbye.